Hello everyone, welcome to the video lecture on the second set of readings from Friedrich Nietzsche. Your first readings engage Nietzsche's works, The Genealogy of Morals and Beyond Good and Evil. This reading will engage Nietzsche's work, The Antichrist. As you can probably guess from the title, The Antichrist is Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity. Now, in a casual way, Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity is similar to that of Karl Marx. For both Christianity, particularly the belief in an immortal soul and afterlife, are blindfolds put on humanity to distract us from reality. For both Nietzsche and Marx, religion kept people from seeing the true conditions of human existence. As you have discussed for Marx, this truth has to do with the relationship of the working masses and the elite capitalists who exploited them. Religion pacified the masses and kept them from seeing and claiming what was rightfully theirs. In simple terms, Marx was interested in empowering the masses over the greedy, exploitative, and immoral elite. Nietzsche would agree with Marx that religion is a blindfold on reality, but, and this is a big but, the reality that Nietzsche thinks religion obscures is quite different. For Nietzsche, religion is a delusion precisely because it empowers the masses. As you discussed in your first class, Nietzsche argues that higher civilization comes from the distance between aristocrats and the masses, or masters and slaves. Masters have their morality, that the strong are good, and that they have the right to rule the weak, who are despicable. In higher civilizations, for Nietzsche, this type of morality rules. In contrast, slaves have another morality, that the strong are evil and the weak are good. The weak masses resent the strong elite. In turn, they try to supplant the elite. Ironically, Marx is perhaps the most extreme example of this morality. For Nietzsche, in corrupted civilizations, this morality rules. Nietzsche considers modern civilization to be corrupted in precisely this way. Slave morality and its notions of equality and democracy have replaced the master morality with its notion of virtue, honor, pride, and aristocracy. The modern world is corrupted because the inmates are running the asylum. This leads to Nietzsche's critique of religion, especially Christianity. Unlike some contemporary atheists who argue that religion is an obstacle to notions of equality, human rights, and democracy, Nietzsche thinks that Christianity is at the heart of these modern notions. In other words, Nietzsche thinks that modern conceptions like equality come from Christianity, and this is precisely the problem. For Nietzsche, Christianity has made slave morality dominant. He thinks that this is A, a delusion of reality where the strong are meant to rule, and B, a corruption of civilization and a debasement of true virtue. Hence, referring back to Benedict, the virtues from Eros have been poisoned by Christian agape. In Nietzsche's terms, the will to power, the natural expression of Eros, has been subdued by a deformed morality, God's equal and open embrace of all of humanity, or agape. For Nietzsche, the corruption of civilization is laid directly at the feet of Christianity. This leads to today's readings and some clues for understanding Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity. The first point, and an essential one, is that in this reading, Nietzsche does not blame Jesus for this corruption. In many ways, he speaks highly of Jesus. Instead, Nietzsche blames Christ's disciples, especially Paul, for this corruption. Therefore, pay attention to the way Nietzsche describes Jesus and ask yourself if his description is entirely inaccurate. Now, the reason he blames the disciples for this, and the second point, is that according to Nietzsche, seeing Christ crucified caused his disciples to feel shame and dismay. They followed Christ as their leader. Once their leader was executed, they felt as if they needed to justify why they followed him. For Nietzsche, this need to justify their devotion in the face of Christ's execution is the initial corruption of the true gospel. The focus was no longer on how Christ lived up to and at the moment of his death. Instead, the focus shifted to why Jesus died, who was to blame, and what was its purpose. For Nietzsche, this initial corruption had two effects. First, it turned the disciples away from how Christ lived and died. This, for Nietzsche, was the true gospel. Second, it turned Christ into a scapegoat. Christ, the strong man, was sacrificed for the weak. While you are reading, think about how this notion that Christ, the strong man, sacrificed for the weak relates to slave morality. How the notion that the strong should be sacrificed for the weak is a corruption for Nietzsche, how Christianity, though not precisely Christ, represents slave morality. The final point to focus on is how Nietzsche describes the progression or genealogy from this initial corruption to modern notions of equal rights. For Nietzsche, there is a direct connection between the notion of Christ as a sacrifice for all humanity, a sacrifice given out of an all-embracing love or agape, the focus on the afterlife and immortal souls, and the delusion of human equality. Simply put, for Nietzsche, all humans are not equal. Some people are just better than others. For Nietzsche, the idea of equality is a distortion and delusion. This distortion and delusion comes from Christianity, especially Paul. It is not only a distortion of reality, it is also a distortion of Christ himself. While you are reading, think about how Nietzsche is ironically arguing against what he thinks is a dualism inherent in Christianity. While you might disagree with Nietzsche, think about whether Christianity is missing something when it focuses exclusively on Christ as a savior of our spiritual souls and not on Christ as showing us a way to live our material bodily existence. Think about how Benedict's description of humanity in Deus Caritas Est, as only being truly human when body and soul are united, relates to this criticism from Nietzsche. All right, thanks everyone, and good luck.